You know that person who gets a quiet thrill when plans get cancelled? Not relief mixed with guilt. Not the apologetic, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I just need a night in." But genuine, uncomplicated happiness. The kind that comes from closing the front door, changing into comfortable clothes, and exhaling for the first time all day. Society has decided this person has a problem. They're called antisocial, boring, afraid of life. They get the gentle concern of friends who want to get them out of their shell, as though the shell is the problem and not the solution. But what if everything we've been told about this is wrong? What if the person happiest on their couch on a Friday night isn't missing out on life, but has simply figured out something about it that everyone else is still searching for? Your brain has a setting. Theirs is just different from yours. Neuroscience has a concept called optimal arousal, the level of external stimulation at which a brain functions best. Think of it as an internal thermostat. Everyone has one. But the temperature that feels comfortable varies enormously from person to person. For some brains, constant input is the fuel. The noise, the crowd, the unpredictability, the social electricity of a room full of people, all of it is data the brain processes as reward. Extroverted nervous systems are quite literally wired to seek this. It feels good because it is good for them. For other brains, that same environment isn't fuel. It's expenditure. Every unexpected social interaction. Every noise that requires interpretation. Every micro-adjustment you make to read a room, respond correctly, present the right version of yourself, each one draws from a finite reservoir. And for people with higher sensitivity to stimulation, that reservoir depletes faster than most people around them would ever guess. A 2018 study in the Journal of Personality found that highly sensitive individuals process sensory information approximately 40% more deeply than the average person. Not 40% more emotionally, 40% more thoroughly. More layers. More detail. More metabolic cost. This means that a party which barely registers as stimulating for one person can be, for another, the cognitive equivalent of a full day's work. Neither brain is broken. They're just running different software. When the person who loves staying home finally closes the door on the outside world, they're not retreating from life. They're returning to their natural operating frequency, the one where they don't have to screen every input for social threat, or monitor themselves for how they're coming across, or maintain the low-level performance that all social interaction requires. They're not recharging. They're finally just running. Why home feels like the only place you can breathe. The outside world is fundamentally, structurally unpredictable. Someone cuts you off in traffic. A colleague is in an inexplicably strange mood. A shop has rearranged its layout. Your usual coffee order comes back wrong. These are objectively minor things. But your brain doesn't file them under minor. Your brain files them under variables outside your control, and it processes each one accordingly. Now think about what home actually offers. You know where everything is. You control the temperature, the light, the sound, the pace. You decide who enters and when. You know what's going to happen next because you're the one deciding what happens next. Nothing is going to surprise you in a way that requires immediate social management. Psychologists call this environmental mastery, the degree to which a person feels they can shape and navigate their immediate surroundings. And research from UC Berkeley suggests that people who develop a strong psychological attachment to their personal space score significantly higher in both emotional self-regulation and self-sufficiency. They're not dependent on external circumstances to feel stable, because they've built an internal world, and a physical space that doesn't constantly destabilize them. Here's the part that makes some people uncomfortable. The more genuinely content someone is alone, the less they need from other people. And in a culture that generates enormous amounts of social obligation and collective anxiety about whether anyone actually likes us, a person who is simply fine being by themselves is quietly threatening to the whole system. If you don't need the party to feel valuable, what does that say about everyone who does? It says they're different. Not better or worse. Just oriented differently toward where meaning comes from. It's not that they don't like people. It's that they're selective about which people are worth the energy. There's a question worth sitting with. Would you rather have 100 people who know your name, or 3 people who know who you actually are? People who love staying home have usually already answered this. And their answer shapes everything about how they move through the world. Psychology describes 2 broad models of social investment. The first is breadth-based, many connections, wide social networks, identity reinforced by how many people recognize and engage with you. This is the dominant cultural model. It's what most social media is built to serve. The second is depth-based, fewer connections, but ones of genuine substance. Less time performing for an audience, more time actually knowing and being known by a small number of people. Neither model is superior. But the depth model is consistently undervalued, partly because it's invisible. You can't photograph intimacy. You can't post a story about a 3-hour conversation that actually changed how you see something. The Harvard Study of Adult Development, one of the longest-running studies of human life ever conducted, tracking participants for over 75 years, found that the single strongest predictor of health, happiness, and longevity wasn't wealth, status, fame, or productivity. It was the quality of close relationships. Not the quantity. The quality. The people who understood this intuitively, who chose depth over breadth before anyone told them it was scientifically sound, they were, more often than not, the ones who preferred a quiet evening with one good friend over a crowded room full of acquaintances. Staying home isn't about avoiding people. It's about protecting the energy required to actually show up for the people who matter. What's actually happening in your brain when you're doing nothing? Society has a story about what people who stay home are doing with their time. Watching television. Scrolling. Wasting hours that could be spent on something worthwhile. The neuroscience tells a completely different story. When the brain is freed from the constant task of processing external stimuli, it activates what's known as the default mode network, a system of interconnected regions responsible for self-reflection, memory integration, future planning, creative synthesis, and the construction of personal meaning. This is the network through which you make sense of your own life. Where you process what happened, imagine what might happen, and figure out who you are. It cannot operate at full capacity when you're busy managing external demands. It requires a particular quality of quiet to do its best work. Studies using fMRI imaging have found that individuals who regularly spend time in genuine solitude, not distracted solitude, but actual unstructured alone time, show more active and more developed default mode networks. Their capacity for complex thought, creative connection, and emotional processing is literally more robust. Einstein developed the thought experiments that became special relativity while working largely alone. Maya Angelou wrote in a stripped-down hotel room she rented specifically to have nowhere to be. Beethoven composed in an isolation so complete that his deafness, devastating in every other context, left his creative inner world undisturbed. Solitude isn't where good thinking goes to die. Solitude is where it becomes possible in the first place. And in a world that has made constant connectivity both a social norm and an economic product, the ability to be alone with your own thoughts, without immediately reaching for a phone, a podcast, a notification, may be the most underrated cognitive skill available. The question that needs asking honestly. Everything above is true. And it comes with a necessary counterweight. There's a meaningful difference between choosing solitude and hiding inside it. Between staying home because it genuinely nourishes you and staying home because going out has started to feel impossible. If you've been nodding along, recognizing yourself in every paragraph, there's one question worth sitting with honestly. Am I staying home because it fills me up, or because leaving has started to feel like too much? Healthy solitude comes from a place of genuine abundance. You've had real connections. You know you can have them again. Being home is a choice you're making from fullness, not one you're falling into from fear. But when the preference for staying in is accompanied by significant anxiety about leaving, persistent avoidance of connections you actually want, a creeping sense that the world outside has become too large and too threatening, that's worth paying attention to. Not with shame, but with honesty. Because the goal isn't to force yourself into a social life that doesn't fit you. The goal is to make sure you're choosing your life from a position of strength rather than quietly building walls and calling them preferences. There's no weakness in recognizing that distinction. There's only clarity. The secret that homebodies have already figured out. Here is what the research on sustainable happiness keeps arriving at, from different directions and different methodologies. Meaning isn't found in peak experiences. It's built in ordinary ones, repeated with intention over time. The culture we live in is addicted to the extraordinary. The trip, the event, the achievement, the moment worth photographing and sharing. We've organized our sense of a life well lived around these spikes of intensity, and then wondered why happiness feels so difficult to sustain between them. People who love staying home have, often without consciously deciding to, opted out of that particular treadmill. The morning coffee made exactly how they like it. The book that's been waiting on the nightstand all week. The specific quality of afternoon light through a familiar window. The sound of rain on a roof while you're already inside. These aren't consolation prizes for people who couldn't get invited somewhere better. These are, according to decades of well-being research, closer to the actual ingredients of a contented life than most of the things we exhaust ourselves pursuing. Sustainable happiness emerges from daily practice, not occasional peaks. The people who consistently report the highest life satisfaction aren't the ones with the most exciting lives. They're the ones with the most meaningful routines, and the presence of mind to actually inhabit them. What this all comes down to. The person who genuinely loves staying home is not antisocial. They are selectively social, a meaningful distinction. They are not lazy. They are energy conscious, aware that their resources are finite and deliberate about where those resources go. They are not missing out. They have simply declined to participate in a particular version of what a life is supposed to look like, the version that requires constant witnesses, constant movement, constant proof that something is happening. Their brain processes the world differently. Their sense of meaning is located differently. Their idea of a life well lived doesn't require an audience to validate it. And in a culture that has become deeply anxious about being seen, being busy, being everywhere simultaneously, a person who is genuinely, quietly content being nowhere in particular might be practicing something the rest of us are still trying to learn. You are not broken because Saturday night on the couch sounds better than a crowded bar. You are not boring because your most restorative evenings don't involve other people. You are not less than because the life you've built doesn't need external validation to feel like enough. You're just wired differently. And that wiring, properly understood, properly honored, is not a limitation. It might be one of the more undervalued ways there is to be a person.